All right, friends, in today's episode, I interviewed Dr. Latt Mansor. He's a distinguished researcher and world-renowned expert in physiology and metabolism. He holds a PhD from Oxford, where he conducted pioneering research on the metabolism of type 2 diabetic heart in hypoxia. Dr. Mansor serves as the research lead at HVMN, where he oversees all the company's initiatives and collaborations with universities and research institutions. His extensive knowledge and experience in the field have made him a sought-after speaker and consultant for elite athletes and military organizations. He's made a significant contribution in understanding the role of exogenous ketones, and that's why I'm bringing him on the podcast today. I've been using exogenous ketones since 2017, and the technology has improved vastly. It started as salts and moved to esters, and today's best of the best on the market is a diol. And so Dr. Latt is going to explain the use and the role of exogenous ketones and everything from lowering inflammation to supporting someone through a traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, dementia, how exogenous ketones work in the body and their benefits, what he's seeing in the research, why the United States government has contracts with him to provide energy to our elite men on the front line. So really exciting stuff. Dr. Latt Mansor is the research lead at a company called HVMN. I am not an investor or an owner in this company. This is in no way a sponsored podcast. However, I do have an affiliate discount code. If you use the code Kelly, you will get 20% off of your order with HVMN. And that's because I use the product Ketone IQ with a number of my clients, and I want to offer that discount to you. So should you use that discount code, I would receive an affiliate payment, but in all other sense of the word, I am not being paid for this podcast. It's just really, really important information that I want to get out to my community because I'm so impressed with how the technology has improved, how much better it tastes, how great you can feel, and all of the benefits. So I'm so excited for you guys to learn about exogenous ketones. Let's welcome Dr. Latt to the show. All right, Dr. Latt Mansor, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast. First of all, I love your podcast over at HVMN and all that you're doing. I know that podcast, you speak to primarily men, but what we're going to talk about today is for the women as well. It's something that I've used as a ketone supplement, and they've changed so much over the years, and you're going to give people the history and explain the differences of those different types of ketones. But I just am so excited to download all of your knowledge to my community and share it. So thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. And I don't think, it's about male or females. At the end of the day, all 8 billion of us, we do metabolism all the time. And that's what I learned at school. And that's what I'm doing right now and really running research around metabolism. Yes, metabolism of a female may be a little bit different to a male, but then when it comes to general health, there are certain areas that definitely overlaps and we can take note from one another to then, improve our health and lifestyles.
I love it. Well, let's start with your background. Speaking of research, how did you find yourself working for HVMN? What's your background? How did you fall in love with metabolism? And yeah, give us
It's
give us a
it's a
little bit about
long
you.
it's a long journey. I was born and bred in Malaysia, tiny country in Southeast Asia in between Thailand and Singapore, for those of you who do not know. I didn't leave the country until I was 20. I went to the UK, did my undergraduate in biotechnology. And um, right after undergraduate, I went to New York, Columbia University, did my master's also in biotechnology. And then when I finished that, I realized I don't like doing research. I was like, this is too boring. I like to speak to people. I like to be a science communicator, hence what I'm doing now, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, let's find a job and start paying off student loans and debts and all of that. And I got a job in a pharmaceutical company based in New Jersey called the Medicines Company, which sort of at that point in time specialized in critical care pathway in cardiovascular disease and medicine. I worked for them for about a year and a half. Um, and then I went back to school. I went back to school because during that year and a half, I was really inspired by the scientists in that company because they were so business minded, they were so entrepreneurial, but at the same time, very critical when it comes to data, science, evidence based medicine. And that inspired me to tell myself that yes, I can be a PhD holder, a scientist, but still be able to be that bridge that connects the general population and the cutting edge science, which is what the scientists are doing in the lab. And mind you, all of this also comes from something really close to my heart, which is my family's high prevalence in chronic diseases. My mom's side has really high prevalence in diabetes, and my late dad, passed away from stroke. And before that, he had a heart attack and he had an open heart surgery. And then my half brother also passed away from heart attack at the age of 40 plus a couple of years ago. So those combination, I know that I don't have the best genetic makeup, and that sort of drove me to learn more about metabolism. And also, what didn't help was as I was growing up, I was also overweight. I was
Mhm.
overweight for half of my life now, until I was 22 when I was in my undergraduate. And only then I started exercising. I started learning more about physiology and metabolism and know that there is something I can do to change, that I can simply, choose to eat healthier, choose to do more exercise, and then voila, I see the change, right? So after the pharmaceutical company journey, I started my PhD at the University of Oxford back in the UK, because it takes only 3 years to do a PhD in the UK versus in the US, even though my master's was in the US. But then I found out that to do a PhD here is like 5 to 6 years. So I went back to school, did my PhD, ironically, in diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So my main research was to look at the connection and the correlation between type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Why do type 2 diabetic patients have higher mortality rate when they have a heart attack? And even if they survive a heart attack, why do they have a higher risk of developing heart failure later on? So that was my whole thesis and my whole research around my PhD. And after that, I went back to Southeast Asia. I was in Singapore and Malaysia. I worked for a health tech company. I worked for a diabetes management company for a year and a half, and then came out and started my own health tech company, ran it for a year and a half. And then I got introduced to HVMN. And they flew me in 2019 to San Francisco, first time in San Francisco, got me a full week of interview. I presented in front of the whole team at the end of the week, and they offered me a job. They sorted out my visa. I flew here in August 2019, and the rest is history. So ever since then, I am the research lead of HVMN. My main responsibility is to oversee all the research and development around science, around our product, and also collaborations with universities, researchers, institutions, as well as grant applications, and also writing review papers around what is the latest data and latest literature around ketone metabolism specifically, because the company sells exogenous ketone, ketone IQ, which you and I spoke about earlier. It's a ketone diol, and we can dive more into that. And the reason why I'm so passionate about what I do now is because it gives me the opportunity to be really close to the science, but at the same time, I'm making impact in people's lives via HVMN podcast, like you said, via the product itself. Just
Mhm.
people giving us reviews about how it positively impacts people's lives. It is really gratifying for me as a scientist, because most of the time scientists stays in the lab and do their experiments. And then a few years later, they publish a paper, not knowing whether or not that knowledge is being turned or translated into an application, which then can benefit human beings.
I know it's such a slow process too. When you look at a published paper, on average, it takes 19 years before a physician that touches a patient is actually verbalizing the results from those papers. And then only then, 3 to 5 years post the, excitement around a study for an entrepreneur, an innovator to take that research and create a product that then makes change. And I mean, that's why I'm so excited to have you on the podcast, because I have used exogenous ketones with people before. I've used the keto diet. But I've used exogenous ketones without clients being in ketosis. I think there's phenomenal benefit to ketones in general for mitochondrial health, cognition. We're now seeing it not only in, aerobic and anaerobic activities, but just I'm so excited to share your research on the podcast today. And I'd like for you to lead the conversation in explaining the differences in the history of exogenous ketones, how they started, how they've innovated over time, and how we got to the ketone diol and why it is probably the best in regards to what's out there and why. So excited that you get to do what you love and that you're making an impact too. So let's start from, because I want this to be a 101. Can you explain the difference between someone being in ketosis and producing ketones versus exogenous ketones?
Yeah, that's a great point to start. Let's differentiate between endogenous ketones and exogenous ketones, right? Endogenous, we're talking about internal, where we produce our own ketones. Our bodies, we evolve to produce ketones from fat when we are low on glucose or sugar storage. So when we are in, back in the days in at prehistoric humans, when they go for hunts, they won't have food all the time because they don't have storage, right? So they will go through periods where they are fed, and then they'll go through periods where they're fasted or they're going through famine or whatever. At that point, their sugar storage in the form of glycogen will be very low. But the brain runs primarily on glucose normally. What happens when our body runs low on glucose? We need some other form of substrates for the brain to work. Otherwise, our brain, which is only 2% of our body weight, but using 25% of our daily calories, will just be dead and will be dead. So the other substrates that are available for energy would be either proteins or fats, the macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbs, right? So we're running out of carbs. We don't want to use protein because protein is really valuable to us. Muscles, enzymes, hormones, everything are made out of protein. So until we really need to break down protein and use it for energy, let's use other substrates first. And that remains, that leaves us to fats. However, fatty acids are too big of a molecule to bypass the blood-brain barrier.
Mhm.
So then our bodies cleverly evolved into a way where our livers can convert fatty acids into ketones, which are smaller molecules that can bypass the blood-brain barrier. And therefore, the ketones enter the brain creates energy from ketones. And we have seen in studies as well, when ketones are present, certain organs such as brain and the heart, they would take up ketones
They prefer them.
regardless. They prefer them regardless of the presence of other substrates. So
Mhm.
so that to us showing that the cells will always choose the path of least resistance. Whatever that is most efficient in terms of energy production, it will choose that substrate. So it just shows us how much more ketone is a more efficient fuel compared to other substrates. The problem with the modern human being is that we have so much access to glucose,
Mhm.
food in general. We eat
Mhm.
a lot more frequently, and therefore drives up our insulin levels. And
Mhm.
when the insulin level is higher in your body, it inhibits ketogenesis, which is the process at which your liver produces ketones from fats. So that's why people go on ketogenic diet or intermittent fasting, because you are deliberately lowering your blood glucose as well as your glucose storage in order to drive insulin down and kickstart that ketogenesis process, and then put you in ketosis. And ketosis is a general term defined as your blood ketone levels above 0.5 millimolar. If you are not in ketosis, if you're just having a normal diet, standard American diet or Western diet, your ketone levels should be between 0 to 0.1 millimolar, very low. But anything above 0.5, you are considered a nutritional ketosis. But now they are also debating this term of therapeutic ketosis of anything above 1.0 millimolar for therapeutic uses, either for metabolic health or Alzheimer's disease or even heart failure patients. And we can talk about that in the studies as well. So that's endogenous ketones. So that's like the history of why ketones, what are ketones and why ketones are there. So our bodies already genetically designed to be able to, one, produce ketones, and two, to metabolize ketones for energy. So there is no notion of a foreign molecule here. It is something that we produce ourselves. It's like glucose, like proteins, and that's the importance of ketones in our lives. Now let's move on to exogenous ketones. About 20 years ago, the US military funded a research metabolic dominance project, metabolic dominance. They want to figure out a form of fuel or super fuel for the military to go on long and demanding journeys or missions. What can the military personnel take in order for them to have high physical performance and also high cognitive performance, even if they are low on food, low on sugar? If you think about it, then ketones come into the picture. But then that requires them to either fast, which is not ideal, or restrict their diet, which is also not ideal when they're out and doing the operations. They eat whatever they can.
Yeah.
So that's why the idea of exogenous ketone, which is external ketones, a ketones that you can literally drink in order to increase your blood ketone levels, come in. And that is the first time in human history we are able to create a physiological situation where you have higher blood glucose, meaning you're not on ketogenic diet, you're not fasting, but you can still have high ketone levels. That's where exogenous ketones come in. And through a lot of studies, we have seen in this state, people are getting a lot more benefit in terms of performance. In cognitive performance, people just feel the mental clarity and acuity. And then they feel the physical performance as well in terms of endurance and anaerobic exercise. We just finished a study with the University of North Georgia looking at anaerobic exercise using ketones and glucose, which has never been done before. And we saw an overall increase in peak power, in average power, in velocity, as well as decrease in fatigue, which is huge, right? So a few decades down the road, in 2017, HVMN brought to the market the first ketone ester. Now, the three main ketone bodies that we produce in our bodies are acetone, acetoacetate, and beta hydroxybutyrate. The last form, beta hydroxybutyrate or BHB, if you hear it, is the main ketone body that is being circulated around the body in the blood, as well as being metabolized for energy. There have been studies that suggest that acetoacetate may be used for signaling, especially for anti-epilepsy and all of that, and inflammation. But beta hydroxybutyrate is the more stable form, which is being circulated around the body. So that's a ketone, right? All three of them are ketone bodies. What is ketone ester? Ketone ester is essentially a molecule that binds a ketone body, like BHB, to a butane diol. So the bond itself is called an ester bond. That's why it's called ketone ester. So 2017, HVMN brought into the market the first ketone ester in the world, and a lot of athletes have been using since then. The problem with ketone ester is that, one, it's too expensive. It was 25 grams for about $33, and I think now it's like $40 or whatsoever. The second problem is at that point, we didn't think it was a problem. We thought it was a good thing because it managed to spike your blood ketone levels up to 3 to 5 millimolar, which is really, really high, right? If we're talking about fasting, you might get 0.5, 0.8. Some people who are very keto adapted, they'll get like 1, 2 millimolar. But imagine drinking this within half an hour, you go up to 3 to 5 millimolar. And that huge spike, some studies actually came out later on showing that across the board, whenever you have a high spike of blood ketones, you lower your blood pH, meaning you increase acidity of your blood. And when you're doing that to work out and to exercise, your body will upregulate all your stress biomarkers as well as your cardiorespiratory markers because your body is trying to excrete a lot of carbon dioxide out to neutralize blood pH,
Right.
right? So this study, particularly McCarthy et al., they found that these athletes did not improve their performance. They didn't do worse. They did not improve their performance either. But what they did notice is that these athletes felt that they work harder. They had a much higher rate of perceived exertion.
Mm-hmm.
So you're essentially giving yourself a handicap and feel like you're working out harder without the benefit of actually achieving the objective performance benefit. So those 2 points, price and then the acidification of blood. The third point is the taste. I don't know if you've tasted ketone esters, but
Motor
they are
oil.
very, very bitter. They've been described as motor oil, rocket fuel, battery
Oh.
acid. Not that people have tried any of those, but it literally tastes it's a very hard punch to your throat and your taste buds when you drink it. And when it comes to ketones, we are slowly now seeing way more applications of ketones, especially in therapeutic uses in diabetes, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases, even mental health. And these people need to take a supplement or be on ketogenic diet over a long time and uh, consistently and make it sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
Having to drink a very bad tasting drink every day, multiple times a day, is not sustainable.
Yeah.
So, therefore, in 2021, we decided to come out with the ketone diol, which is what we have right now called Ketone IQ. Got a big bottle here. We also have shots that has single serve um, bottles that are available nationwide in Sprouts now. So you can
Oh,
literally go
congrats.
go there. Thank you. You can go there, get yourself a shot of Ketone IQ. The first one is on us as well, so you can scan the QR code and we'll refund you for the first shot, so that everyone can try how it feels to one, have ketones in your body. And we believe in the product so much that we know that once someone tries it, you can literally feel the subjective difference when you are on ketone IQ. So that's why we're like, you know what, first shot is ours. Um, what is so different with ketone diol? So ketone diol raw ingredient is butanediol. So earlier when I talked about ketone ester is BHB bound with butanediol
Mm-hmm.
in an ester bond. We essentially took half of it, just the butanediol portion, because what spikes your blood BHB high up so high so quickly is the BHB portion. So we
Right.
took butanediol, and butanediol goes into your liver and then gets converted into beta hydroxybutyrate or BHB.
Mm-hmm.
So your liver acts as the gatekeeper because it gets signals from the rest of your body to say that, hey, I've got enough energy. Let's not release that much BHB into the blood. And that's, sure enough, in all our studies, even at a higher dose, you only cap at about 2.5 millimolar, which is great because it keeps your ketone levels in that Goldilocks zone. Just because something is good doesn't mean that higher is better, more is better. That does not work with metabolism. What I've learned is that we are always in the state of homeostasis. And we're
Right.
always in a state where we need to be in an optimal range, optimal temperature, optimal pH, optimal salts,
Blood
there's
sugar.
blood sugar. There's always a range. Is just because something is good for you doesn't mean that you need to pile everything on.
Right.
So yeah, so the taste is better, it's cheaper, and it doesn't spike your blood BHB that high. And that's the reason.
Yeah. Well, just even looking at the acidity in the blood and seeing that you can get up to a 3 to 5. If anyone has been in ketosis something that, prior to my pregnancies and breastfeeding and deliveries and all of that, I'm in the mommy phase. So it's not as easily accessible for me right now. And it's not something that I use. But prior to getting pregnant, it was something that I used to feel my best. And I actually was testing my blood levels of ketones. And that's actually the first test that I found out I was pregnant, because before I took a pregnancy test for my son Sebastian, was because it's very difficult. Like me in a state of ketosis, just eating a low carbohydrate diet, maybe adding a little MCT oil, not a lot, but like a tablespoon or two in a day, leaning into those fattier proteins like salmon. I was maybe 0.75, zero point 0.8. And then all of a sudden, I shot up above 1.5. I was closer to 2. And I was like, oh my God, why am I all of a sudden producing so many ketones and I'm not? And I haven't done anything different. And then I was like, "Oh my god, I need to go get a pregnancy test," because I knew immediately that my body was requiring more energy and producing more energy, and it was that demand of literally making Sebastian in my body that my
A whole
that
life.
my liver kicked it up a notch and was like, "Get this girl some ketones, we're making a baby." I ended up being pregnant, and I maintained I would say a moderate carbohydrate diet, whole food diet, but I wasn't in ketosis anymore. And I haven't been since that period of time. But the majority of people, when they get into ketosis, they feel like their brain's on fire. They feel like they could, they're making new, neural connections. They just feel like they have zero hunger. You could go forever. It's amazing if anyone's ever dipped into nutritional ketosis and been at that stage, how great you feel. And I think it's because there's little dips. You aren't requiring glucose. You're not on that blood sugar roller coaster. You don't feel the highs and lows. You just feel this sustained cognition and energy level. And, I would say in the past when I was working with clients, and now also today, one of the reasons why I have you on the podcast is I was working with Halle Berry for this movie this year, and something that I wanted for her was cognition and a pre-workout that I felt like would give her the strength, the energy and the sustainability to really level up and feel good if we were having to go so serious for this role. And so we started using your product, really, really loved it for her.
We saw the
Um,
video. We saw the clip where she held her nose and drank it.
and took a shot. And I will say, I mean, it's not going to taste like a juice or something. It's
Yeah.
not going to be like that, but what a massive improvement in taste in regards to, if anyone, like you said, has had a ketone ester, it used to taste like motor oil.
Yeah.
But I've used exogenous ketones for people who weren't in ketosis for a long time. And Hallie is not in ketosis. We don't have her in ketosis. But when I think about when I used and have used exogenous ketones for clients, female clients, who, for example, would tell me, I don't like to work out on an empty stomach. I can't work out fasted. It feels like I feel nauseous, or I feel like dizzy, or I just don't feel like I have energy. I loved exogenous ketones for that as a way to get a fasted workout in. And then we'd feed within 90 minutes after a workout. And that might include carbohydrates,
Exactly.
or it might not. But just getting people over the hump of that, or moving someone from a highly processed, really high carbohydrate style diet, leaning into those whole foods. Even without going into ketosis, someone could feel flu-like symptoms. I would use exogenous ketones for something like that as a bridge, as an appetite suppressant. I don't think people realize that not only are ketones like so phenomenal for cognition and energy and like just feeling great, but they're anti-inflammatory, they're phenomenal for mitochondrial health. Like the list goes on and
E
on. We just have constant access to food, and so we never make them anymore. And then
exactly.
it's hard. You're like, well, I always have glucose or I always have food. Pulling back and having those breaks where you're like, oh, but I really want to eat something, or it gets people over the hump. That really helps. And so
And fun
I
fact as well, as you were talking about babies, most babies, they are in the state of ketosis at all times because they don't have a lot of sugar, as you know, that either you're breastfeeding or you just giving milk. It's just high fat diet, right? It's essentially ketogenic diet. And these kind of ketones are very essential for the development of an infant brain. I didn't even know this until earlier, a few weeks ago. I interviewed Dr. Tommy Wood from university in Seattle, that his specialty is in brain health and traumatic brain injury and all of that. And he said, what they have seen in research is that when people have brain injury, the brain takes up ketones even more because the brain not only uses ketone for energy from metabolism, but it uses ketone to synthesize fatty acids in order to build the structural context of these cells of the neurons to repair the damage. So I can only see that being the same in a developing brain as well for infants.
That's so fascinating to me. And it just goes to show, I mean, some of these very like affordable, I would say free ways to take care of your health is really to have those breaks overnight. Doesn't have to be aggressive intermittent fasting, but at least a 12-hour fast overnight, to lean into the whole foods, to not be constantly eating and snacking all day. And then, if you're in a stage where you aren't like breastfeeding another human and with little toddlers, but if it's in a stage for you where you want to dip into ketosis, the benefits of that for your brain and your body. I don't know if you know Chris Palmer's work. I had him on the
Yes, we
podcast.
had him on the podcast as well. Brain Energy, his book, amazing. We went in depth in the science because I really questioned his sort of idea around mental health being redefined as the metabolic disorder of the brain. And I pressed him on the scientific questions and the scientific data as a scientist myself, and he answered beautifully with both case study as well as clinical trials and animal work. So yes, absolutely, love Chris, and shout out to him.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it's just fascinating because it is all about our body's ability and our specifically our mitochondria's ability to produce energy. And if you're in a state where, you have broken down mitochondria or poor mitochondrial function due to whether it's endocrine disrupting chemicals or just your lifestyle choices and chronic stress over time, and you haven't given your body a break to go through mitophagy and rebuild those mitochondria, and you're not fat adapted and you're constantly eating and you have access to glucose, like knowing how important brain energy is for how we feel and our mental health, having access to a ketone dial like ketone IQ, I think, should be a first line of defense for people when it comes to you just get bucketed. Unfortunately for for ketone IQ, it can get bucketed into biohacking guys who are ultra marathoners, like I said, and it's not the case. There's such a use case for it across the board, in times of life where you really need that extra energy and you need that mental clarity. Which brings me to a personal question. I am pregnant in my third trimester of pregnancy. I'm going out on maternity leave, and that's when this podcast will come out. I how can I incorporate ketone dials into my life? Can I? What's your recommendation?
I'm not a medical doctor myself, so I am not going to give you any medical advice. But so far, we always recommend people, especially pregnant women, to check with their physicians first.
Sure.
I don't think there is a specific harm to do it. Like a lot of supplements, they say, if you're pregnant, don't take it. It's not because they're harmful to pregnant women. It's
Right.
because they haven't done the studies on pregnant women, because it's difficult to recruit like pregnant women specifically, and the study is going to be very narrow.
Right.
And that's why a lot of companies, they put that disclaimer, if you're pregnant, don't take this. It's not because it's most of the time it's not because it's harmful. So I would check with the doctor. I don't think, being in ketosis is a problem. But as you said, your body will start producing ketones because you're literally cultivating a new life within you, and you
Yeah.
will need all the energy that you want. And as well as, infant development relies heavily on ketones as well for the brain development. So hey, have some ketones, better than not, right?
Right.
And yeah, I think that would be what I would suggest.
Well, then I'll go ahead and tell you my plan for postpartum, because I feel like, um, one, I understand how the metabolism and the breakdown of fats in the liver to produce ketone bodies. I know that process. I know that the brain and the heart prefer ketones if they have access to them. I know how quickly and easily I can dip into ketosis pregnant and or breastfeeding. It's pretty, especially once your child starts sleeping through the night and your body is still producing breast milk. It is amazing how quick that process can happen, even if you are incorporating whole food carbohydrates,
Mm.
occasionally in your daytime activities. It's just, or in your diet, it's crazy. So, I mean, for me, I'm looking at it as a mitochondria loving, anti-inflammatory, sustainable energy that will keep my mood level stable and my energy level stable, to not be stressed out and reliant on glucose in those postpartum days, to know that sort of stacking those, a whole food diet with some ketone diol, with some electrolytes, proper hydration, that I'll be able to show up for my toddlers and my family in the way that I want to show up and feel the way that I need to feel. Because I've done the postpartum depletion thing. It's not fun. Didn't happen after my first, but I hit it. It was like being hit by a train in my second. And so this time around, it's like, I just, I have a plan for it, and you guys are a part of it. And I'm just excited to share that, because it's a, can be a difficult time for moms, especially postpartum, especially with young kids, and to not have the energy you need because of lack of sleep and nutrient depletion. Just to know that my body is getting what it needs to just
And
have
that
sustained energy is
and that
critical.
stress level could lead to postpartum depression as well. And as we were talking about Chris Palmer, like he has case studies where depression is being treated with ketogenic diet, and they saw improvement in symptoms. And we published a paper literally 2 weeks ago, a review paper of all the literature that is out right now on how ketones, endogenous and exogenous ketones, may be helpful for major depressive disorders, because the cause of these depression is usually an imbalance in the HPA axis, or the imbalance in stress hormones and cortisol and all of that. And what happened in animal studies, they literally put BHB ketones in the rodents, and they saw improvement in symptoms. But then they also took the brain out, inject ketone directly into the brain, and they saw an increase in expression of BDNF, which is brain derived neurotropic factor, which is super important for development, memory, all of that. And it's directly impacting hippocampus, which is also dictating learning and memory of the brain as well. And as you said earlier, like I thank you for saying that, we were initially bucketed into this athlete performance, high biohacking community. Yes, when we first came out with Ketones in 2017, that was the market, that was the role that it was meant for, because it was researched by military. It was done so that military can go on long and demanding missions, and therefore, like all these Tour de France cyclists started using it, and they saw tremendous results. But then as we branch out and as it became more affordable, especially when we swap over to Ketone IQ, more and more researchers as well as consumers are able to purchase it and have their own use cases. And now we are so excited to just hear the different customized use cases of our customers. Like they would say, like, "Oh, I use this for podcast, and it helps me like wire my brain up." I've got a friend who used it for midterms and quizzes right before, and he felt like he can absorb knowledge much faster and also be able to recall them much faster. So memory recall was something that we seen in our $6 million contract with the DoD, where they took exogenous ketone in hypoxia and low oxygen environment. Memory recall was one of the improved parameters alongside with reaction time. So this has been proven already. I've got friends who use it for workouts. Obviously, we know that CrossFit and all that. I've got friends who use it for jujitsu, and they feel like everything was moving in slow motion, and they can make split-second decisions easily when they're on ketones. What other use cases? I've got friends who have ADHD, and they found it very difficult to sit down and study for an hour. But ever since they use Ketone IQ, they could then focus and study for a few hours instead of
Mm.
just having to, fiddle things around and can't sit still. So there are a lot more use cases than we thought when we launched the first ketone ester in 2017. And now people are using it for blood sugar control because after an hour of taking ketone IQ, your blood sugar will drop, up to like 50 points, which is great, like compared to medication for type 2 diabetics, for example. Like Professor Jonathan Little in University of British Columbia, he published a couple of papers now consistently when taking exogenous ketones, people have managed to drop their blood glucose after food, which is huge, right? Because you don't want that spike of blood sugar and then the crash, and that's where the lull and the snooze fest starts. And when you're on ketone IQ, you just have that, like you said, the maintained energy level. You get the anti-inflammatory properties as well. And that was what we sort of examined around mental health and brain injury, especially when you have a traumatic brain injury, you have a high level of inflammation at that point, right?
Mhm.
And we need that inflammation because you need the body to react to it. But then over time, when you have sustained chronic inflammation, that's when things go bad in the brain and also in the body. When people having insulin resistance, you will find that they have chronic inflammation as well. So the anti-inflammatory properties of ketone IQ may help them in the long run, especially if you couple it with a very strong, healthy foundation. So I always tell people, ultimately, this is a supplement. You still need to have a healthy foundation when it comes to sleep, your physical activity, your stress management, your nutrition. It's not a miracle drug. It will not
Yeah.
solve all your problems. Unfortunately, we would love to. Then we will be able to make loads of money. But that's
Me
the truth of science, right? It helps you. It gives you energy. It gives you the mental clarity so that you can then go out and do more physical exercises so that you can be more productive. You can be happier about it. And then in turn, it becomes less stressful for you when you're tasked with a lot of different predicaments and challenges. And then overall, improves your mental health. You see how everything is connected? It's life is more complicated than a linear pathway.
Yeah, well, you're delivering a phenomenal source of energy that can be used in our cells and our mitochondria to produce this, like, just to give us what we need. And every single cell has these. And that, whether that's, your ovarian cells, your heart cells, your brain cells, your muscle cells, like they're all going to benefit. And so, yeah, there's a use case for all of it. I would say, I can echo some of your clients or the studies or the friends that have used Ketone IQ. For me, for clients, like I said, it's that bridge of we're trying to get you on a cleaner path. It's a bridge when someone has a hard time doing a fasted workout first thing in the morning. For me personally, I played soccer growing up. I've been pretty active my whole life. I know what it feels like those first 15 minutes when you're like, oh, I'm lulling. There's a lull. And I can get over the hump and work out fasted and kind of get through that yucky period. But when you talk about someone trying to avoid, like I can think of moms trying to avoid eating like kids snacks, or really wanting to stick to their goals and being focused in the morning when they have like drop off for school, lunches, and then jumping into their work life to have the energy to kind of handle all of that. um, that first thing in the morning to kind of keep their eye on the prize and hit those goals, it can be really helpful. When you talk about someone maybe making those improper choices as a nutritionist, I think about, okay, you have had some pretty balanced meals, and then 3 o'clock hit and I don't know what happened, but you attacked the pantry, we had some lays, we had some or whatever processed foods. I would use the ketones there, like after that, or hopefully before they grab for it. But even if they did that, what you're talking about, that dip, that's supporting the body to have energy in a dip of glucose when they're crashing and craving, and or when they feel that lull and they go, "Oh, that wasn't the best choice. I'm feeling a lull. I really could go for another fast acting carbohydrate. Instead, I'm going to reach for ketone IQ. I keep mine in my fridge. They taste better cold. I like the shots over the big bottles. These are just preferences of mine because I'm like, let's just take it down and call it a day." But that immediate release of energy to say, like, okay, reset. I have energy. I don't feel the lull. I can make conscious decisions and feel clear about why I'm making those decisions, and then roll into dinner and make a positive choice for myself and my family.
Yeah.
So many use cases, but those
When
are
we
kind of
first,
the ones that I
you know,
would think.
that was the problem with it when we first launched it in 2021, right? Because they asked me, right, as the research lead, as the chief scientist or whatever, like, what are the claims that we can make? And I was like,
Yeah.
well, you can make the anti-inflammatory claim, you can make the metabolic health claim, you can talk about energy, obviously, and performance, athletic recovery, and then cognitive performance. So the list goes on, and then it became way too complicated, and it almost sounds like snake oil, right? Because
Yeah.
it's like, how
you
can
you selling
yeah,
snake oil, Dr.
I know,
Latt?
exactly, exactly. Sounds like, it's too good to be true that it works for all these use cases.
Mhm.
And then now that we have way more data and way more understanding of the product, the way I describe it, it's whatever activity that you will use your brain for, because it's
Mhm.
the brain preferred fuel. So whatever activity that you use your brain for, whether it's podcasts or exams or physical activity or exercise, anytime you need focus, anytime you need brain energy, anytime you feel like you are going through the lull, have it.
Mhm.
Have it, and it will give you the energy you need as well as the focus that you need in order to perform a task or complete a certain challenges.
So saying that, and knowing that a diol versus the ester that connected the BHB to the diol.
Mhm.
So just to recap for everyone listening, the original ester was the BHB and bonded to the diol,
Yeah,
right? And the diol is what's sent to your liver. Your liver then metabolizes that and creates BHB, but it's a slow drip, kind of like slow release,
yeah,
natural, not like an encapsulation pharmaceutical
yeah,
drug that slow release. Your liver is dictating when your body needs these ketones. So it's going to metabolize that stuff and slow drip it out. So now we don't have the BHB attached by that bond. You're not going to see that surge in BHB that gets you to a level where your blood is acidic, where your heart's working overtime, where you're hyperventilating to get rid of the
yeah.
carbon dioxide. You're just going to have that sustained energy that you get when you're in ketosis and your liver is kicking out
Exactly.
amazing BHB.
Exactly.
So you have that good stuff. Now, when you start to compound it and take multiple shots a day, or you're drinking the larger bottles, what is, I love like one a day, or when, like I said, when I'm taping podcasts, or if I have a lull or something like that. Is there an upper limit to how many times someone could take
So
ketone IQ?
what we recommend our customers is to not take more than 3 doses per day. So that's
Mhm.
what we recommend. But we have a lot of athletes who take it while they are exercising or while they are going through a race. And if you measure your blood ketone levels, especially if you're working out, you will find that your ketone level would drop quite quickly because you are using them up. So in
Mhm.
that case, a lot of them, even though we recommend not taking more than 3 per day,
Mm.
they will take up to like, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the beauty of ketone IQ is that, like you said, it's being gate kept by your liver, so it doesn't go way too high. Whereas with ketone ester, it is dose dependent. The more you take, the higher your blood BHB is. So what
Right.
happened with our military guys is that when they took too much, because we weight matched the dose. So some of these guys are huge, right? So they had to take a way higher dose, and their blood ketone levels go up to like 7, 8 millimolar, and that's when they feel ill. They
Yeah.
generally feel unwell. It's like when you overdose yourself with glucose. Like glucose,
Mhm.
sugar is great, it feels great. You get dopamine hit and all that. We're not talking about like the dessert. We're talking about like overdosing, like boluses of sugar,
Yeah.
and you will just feel sick. You just want to throw out. Your body just feels like it's just too much for me. So
Yeah.
that's how you would feel if you have too high of the blood BHB level. And obviously that could also be dangerous for type 1 diabetics who might, get ketoacidosis. But that's like a whole different issue that usually
Yeah.
type 1 diabetics would be very aware of anyway.
Right. Oh gosh, I remember I wrote my first, I guess it was the first trolling hate mail I ever got, but I wrote my first nutritional ketosis article for like a mainstream. It wasn't, it was a lifestyle blog. And the comments I got were like, this is so dangerous. I'm a nurse. And I'm like, "Ugh, I am not talking about
I
ketoacidosis. I'm
know a
not
lot of
talking
people,
about
a lot of
type 1
people.
diabetes. Like, this is so, so different.
And
Like,
it was so recent too, like maybe like 5 years ago that people didn't even know what ketosis was. When the moment you search ketones on Google, ketoacidosis would come out.
yeah.
And ketone has always been known as the byproduct of respiration, of metabolism, but they never talked about the evolutionary part of ketones on how ketones essentially fuel human beings and a lot of other organisms
Mhm.
when they are fasted, for
Mhm.
the brain. So
Well, let's talk about, since you just ended on brain, let's talk about the brain in general. I think things that, for me, being a nutritionist that focus a lot on blood sugar balance and keeping people from, eventually being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance, heart disease. I love metabolic flexibility. I love, you know, using just a regular normal level of fasting. Like I said, not eating outside of a 12-hour window, shrinking that to 10 when you want to give yourself a break, or 8. Okay, fine, occasionally, depending on your life. But it's like the consistency piece and knowing how amazing ketones are when it comes to knowing that Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes. And you think about this brain breakdown and brain energy issue of constantly being supplied glucose and not having, like, just not having that flexibility of substrates. How are ketones and, endogenous or exogenous, supporting like our life's ability to have our mental faculties with us later in life? If we're living later, it's totally different life to be able to use your brain versus unfortunately be in like memory care or something.
I'm so glad you mentioned the word metabolic flexibility. And let's talk about that for 1 second. Because a
Okay.
lot of people, we talk about metabolic health and that 88% of Americans are metabolically unhealthy. And people ask me, what does that even mean? Right? What does metabolically healthy mean? For me, to be metabolically healthy, it means that you are metabolically flexible, that your body is able to metabolize and switch between substrates whenever it needs to in the most optimal situations. So when
Mhm.
you need to burn glucose in an anaerobic exercise, your body burns glucose. When you need to tap into your fat storage when you're going for a long run, then it taps into fat storage. By being inflexible, that's when things go wrong and your body tries to compensate and the feedback loop happens. And that's when, metabolic healthy and unhealthy comes in. So, as you said, the brain primarily uses glucose. And when it's low on glucose, right, it needs something else. And most of the time, what we have seen in studies in both traumatic brain injury and neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's and dementia, there is always a deficit in energy in the brain. And these people are not eating less. These people are not having less glucose in their bodies. Some of them, they have actually quite high glucose. Some of them, they are diabetics, but
Mm-hmm.
their brain is still having that deficit in energy. So that is why it pointed us to the type 3 diabetes connotation, where the brain is actually not receiving or accepting the glucose that is in the blood. Now,
Mm-hmm.
that is where the problem comes in. When there is a lack of energy and the brain uses so much energy, and the brain essentially dictates almost every function of the body, right? And and this is funny when people ask, where does your feeling come from? And they're like, from the heart. And then I know it's actually the brain. The brain dictates. It's a chemical in the brain. And what ketone does is that it provides energy to fill in that gap of energy deficit that glucose cannot go in. Now we can talk about why is glucose not being taken up. It could be insulin resistance in the brain. It
Mm-hmm.
could be some form of dysfunction where glucose transporters are either being saturated or just not being activated in order to pull in the glucose into the brain.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why can ketone then provide energy where glucose can't? It's
Mm-hmm.
because ketones get into the cell via a different transporter. It doesn't go through glucose transporter. It goes through monocarboxylase transporter, or MCT, which is different to medium chain triglycerides. Do not confuse those two. They're both MCT.
But
So
it's how I remember.
yeah, that's how you remember monocarboxylase transporters. Because they use a different transporter, the mechanism at which it is dysfunctional, if the glucose transporter mechanism is not working, MCT has shown to still be working. And that is the beauty of it, because you are providing a separate tank of fuel that the brain can have access to. And this is the same in a failing heart. A failing heart upregulates ketone metabolism on its own, whether or not you are on a ketogenic diet or you have ketones in your body. It upregulates ketone metabolism, showing that it is tapping onto another highway, if you would. If one road is completely congested, you need to find another way, right? You need to get to your destination. And this is what's happening with ketones. You are creating a branched road. Essentially, this branched road is actually the preferred route to get to the destination. But most people, because we're so metabolically inflexible, or we're so metabolically dysfunctional, that we cannot tap into that pathway because we don't produce ketones most of the time, because we have high insulin at all times. So that's where it creates that energy for the brain. But then on top of energy, like I said earlier, ketones also provide the raw material for our brains to create fatty acids in order to repair the structural aspect of the neurons. And then in the sense of chronic inflammation, both in neurodegenerative diseases and brain injury, there is high level of inflammation. Then there is also the anti-inflammatory properties of ketones as well. And most of the scientists do believe that high glucose concentrations actually drive up inflammation, and ketones does the opposite. So all in all, what we have seen, I mean, we published a review paper 2 years ago, actually. Myself, our co-founder Jeff Wu, and our scientific writer Naomi, we basically talked about the potential use of lactate and ketones as therapeutic intervention for traumatic brain injury, and as an extension, neurodegenerative diseases, because of these two main points. One is from an energy deficit point of view, really filling in that gap, and two, from an anti-inflammatory point of view, where over time we saw, after someone has a brain injury, they usually, in the long term, develop some form of metabolic dysfunction where their brain can't use glucose as efficiently. And that's where ketones come in, and hope that that will change their long-term damage and improve their long-term damage in terms of brain fog or coordination or eye movements or whatsoever. We're actually having a pilot study using ketone IQ to treat TBI patients with the Naval Health Research Center very, very soon. We're just signing the contract right now. And two hospitals in Australia also reached out to us, and they are buying ketone IQ to test in their multiple centers on traumatic brain injury and people who are in comatose and having brain injury, and they're trying to feed them ketone IQ and see if their brain function improves.
I mean, it's really exciting. It's really exciting because for so many people, and I saw this when I worked for the Epilepsy Foundation, knowing how beneficial a ketogenic diet is for children with epilepsy, adults with epilepsy, and the ability for a certain percentage of epileptic patients to become seizure free if they can live a ketogenic lifestyle, to see so many still rely on anticonvulsant medications and pharmaceuticals when there is literally a diet like a lifestyle that they could lead to just decrease these. It's really nice to know that this ketone diol is available, because it's just getting people on board with living that lifestyle and giving up carbohydrates, whether it's a financial thing or it's the time, the dedication, deciding that it's just not worth it for them and they'd rather go the pharmaceutical route. To know that someone in a coma in a hospital has the ability to get this energy directly to their brain. I mean, it's just an option in a very serious situation when there is a brain issue, to know, hey, look, like, I get that not everybody's going to do a ketogenic diet. We have other options now, is really promising. And why I thought, snake oil or not, why I thought it was so important to have you on the show. I want people to know, like, this podcast is not sponsored. You haven't paid me to be on this podcast. I normally do interviews with founders of brands that I've personally invested my family's retirement money into. I haven't yet been able to give you my money. I'm working on it. Um, but I will put an affiliate discount code in our show notes. I'll add it to the introduction for today's podcast so that people can get a discount. I would say if there's a Sprouts near you, go take advantage of your free shot, see the difference that you'll feel. I'll tell you personally, it's within 5 minutes that I feel a difference in my brain and my cognition, and it's sustainable for me. I would say, I've taped 3 podcasts today back to back, 90 minutes. I get like a 20-minute break between each one, and I still feel you're my last one, and I can thank your product for being able to put my thoughts together
I could
today.
not tell this is your third podcast of the day.
Yeah.
You were on point.
Well, I'll give you a little credit for that. But that, go take advantage of that free shot at Sprouts if there's a Sprouts in your neighborhood. See the difference you feel, like, note it. And then we'll throw a discount code in the intro and in the show notes so people can go snag it from your website at a discount for my community, because it is an affiliate link. If you do buy through that link, I will be incentivized. But it was really important to me, even though I'm not a seed investor or Series A investor or any of that with you guys, to really support this, because whether, I think about whether your ailing parent has a neurodegenerative disease, if they've been through a traumatic brain injury. My father-in-law passed away of dementia and had multiple strokes. My mother-in-law had a aneurysm on the golf course, and she takes very good care of herself and survived and is with us today. But I think about having access to this and knowing that it was available when we were in the healing of that for her. Like, it would have been something that I would have demanded that she
Oh
get her
my god.
hands on.
Yeah, you should listen
Um,
to one of my podcasts with this, endurance athlete and trainer, Elisa Tamati from New Zealand. Her mom had aneurysm, stroke, brain injury, concussion, and she definitely saw an improvement in cognition when she had a ketone IQ, and Lisa swears by it, and bless her. Yeah.
yeah. Well, we can't get this information out to people. And I think, knowing knowing that neurodegenerative diseases really don't have any pharmaceuticals that are supportive in seeing any type of change really in unfortunately in someone's state, uh, just to know that there's a change, something to try,
Yeah.
and whether someone has epilepsy or is like me, like in a stage with young kids, running a business, wanting energy, having to do podcasts like you, Dr. Latt, whatever it is, like to give it a try for yourself and see if you notice a difference. If not, I'd be surprised. But if you do, you want to try it out more, you can go tune into Dr. Latt's podcast, the HVMN podcast. Check out Ketone IQ, snag the discount code in the show notes and the link. And yeah, I mean, I just can't thank you enough for your time. This was epic and really important for me to just share with my community as a tool. Like I think of everything in the nutrition space as a tool. And like if you understand the science of it and how it works, then you can immediately start applying it to your life and see if it's something that goes in your toolbox, right?
Exactly, exactly. Because you can literally feel it, and you know exactly when you need it for. Because you know your body well, and you know your schedule well. Once you know the effect, you will like immediately like place it into pockets of your life that you will find it very beneficial and impactful in your life. And thank you so much for having me. And the pleasure is mine. Time just flew by. I did not even realize we spoke for more than an hour. And it has been a pleasurable conversation. And for you guys who are listening, thank you again for listening to me. And you can find us at HVMN on all social media, and also myself at Latt Mansor, LattMansor on all social media as well.
Oh, so fun. Well, thank you for sharing where people can follow along. I'll put it all in the show notes. And it was just such a pleasure, like such good information. And I know that there's going to be people in my community that really benefit from it. So thank you.
Thank you. And if they have any questions from your community, happy to do a second round of Q&A and whatnot.
Great. We'll keep you posted.
Thank you.